and my dear followers. I'm here again, Sat Sangat, with the astrology. Today I have a special broadcast because I there is a curious event and very challenging event, and I wanted to say something about this and give you my personal input, astrological input. In fact, today we have Mars in the last quarter square to Chiron. So Mars is the dispositor or the ruler of Aries, where Chiron is transiting presently. So this is a very important transit, and I've had several clients who have natally Chiron in Aries, and I have been reading for them. And well, many of them are curious about what is going to happen when they have the Chiron return. So, because some of them have the Chiron return, either have had it or will have it soon, or in the few next years. Because Chiron will stay in Aries for more than 7 years. So I wanted to talk about this important transit that is happening today. Mars is at 3 degrees 30 something Capricorn, and Chiron is at 330 Aries. So there are other things going on. Among them, I want to especially make a parenthesis comment here about Mercury retrograde, um, because not only is Mercury retrograde, but it's also in Pisces, where it is at fall, quote unquote, and it doesn't work in a linear, logical, reasonable way like it normally would in, for example, Gemini or Virgo. But the thing is that not only is in Pisces, but we have Neptune, which is the ruler of Pisces, transiting the sign of Pisces these days. So we have seen the magnification and the intensification of the Pisces archetype because of this. There are so many things: confusion, general confusion, chaos, addictions. The opioid addiction problem is typical of these, and also the increase that we have experienced in the world in general of addictions and all kinds of escapist behaviors. So it is a challenging time. Neptune will stay in Pisces for several years. I think it's moving on the 2023 or 24, around there. So, and another factor for Mercury retrograde is that now it is invisible. So that means that the sun is so close to it that it's called, what astrologers call, combust or invisible. And that also contributes to the confusion. I am sure that you have noticed wherever house you have Pisces, you have experienced confusion, chaos, this sense of defeat, and sometimes even deception, either by others, or you self deceive yourself because you're so confused that you don't know. So, for example, if Pisces is your second house, that will be your finances. Maybe they are chaotic and you don't know where the money goes and how the money comes and things like that. Suppose that it is, I don't know, your seventh house, and other people are confusing, they confuse you. You have a hard time pinpointing other people, because you really don't know what's going on with them. So that seventh house or any other house, it would be this sense of I don't know, I'm so confused. Well, I'm saying this because Mercury is the ruler of my chart. Um, and I really feel the challenge to either write, broadcast, or do videos, or even when I read, I have to take notes very carefully of my ideas. I do a lot of brainstorming in a written form, and then I try to put the ideas together in a logical way, and it's so hard. So I will try to make sense of this transit of Mars, which is, as I said, the last quarter square to Chiron, and it's very important because it's the last 90 degrees of the cycle, which is Mars is a 2-year cycle, and so it's been a year and a half since last conjuncted Chiron. And it's very important because Mars is, as I said, the ruler of Aries, where Chiron is. So, there was a person in my family who had a couple of head injuries already this week. And this is concerning for some people who have Chiron in Aries. You may experience head injuries or some kind of problem in your head, especially. But if it depends which house Chiron is natally, and also which house Chiron is transiting at the present time. So also Mars, which house Mars is. So there is this danger of accidents in aggression. It could be also verbal aggression. But let me try to give you the pieces of these puzzle that I'm trying to put together. So this is the crisis in consciousness aspect, because it's the last quarter's square, and it means that this is the period where you assimilate the whole cycle that has been taking place, and you're assimilating and integrating the all the events, circumstances, or situations related to Chiron in Aries, and considering the house, as I said, in your personal chart that Chiron is transiting through. So, Mars in Capricorn is action, right? Is action, but within the limits of the established conventions, social conventions, traditions, and also the actions, for example, of government institutions and the establishment of the system, right? So those actions are prominent at the present time. It could be not only action but also assertiveness, aggression, and it can go negatively to violence, because remember, this is a square, so it is, the square aspects are conflict, tension. So Mars by itself is our desires, our wants, and our courage, the initiative. It could also be the sense of independence. Uh, Giving birth, right? Because Mars rules the first Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, and is the baby, right? The baby born. And it's also the yang energy or masculine energy that give us this sexual drive to live. So it is survival, primal survival energy and need. And in Capricorn, it's those are traditional, within the consensus, conventional, focused on the past and what is already established, right? So the challenge to Chiron in Aries requires to make a compromise, and especially to make a compromise and do things that you don't want to do. And this rebellion against things that are required of you and that you need to do but you don't want to do. And this tension opens the door for confrontations and fights, and also challenge. So maybe someone else that challenges you, or the circumstances may be challenging. And you can also receive or make demands of other people, or other people can make demands of you, and especially things that require you to make an effort that either you don't want to do, or you really don't have the energy to do, or are not able to do. Sometimes you are in a situation where you cannot do what is demanded of you. So those are the challenges that come from this square Mars and Chiron. So some of the reactions or the results of this challenging aspects may be that you feel you do an overreaction, right? You react disproportionately, aggressively, and defensive. So you are defending yourself, because suppose that you are demanded of doing something and you are not able to, and you feel powerless, right? You may feel blocked, or you may have a deficit of energy, or you may have a fatigue. You may have a lower energy than regularly. And then, as a consequence, you may be thwarted uh, in several fronts, right? You may have blockages that don't allow you to do, or that you're not capable of do what is demanded of you. So you may feel frustration, and you may try introspection, but also if it is something very serious, like you know that you need to do something and you're not able to do it, and you need to do it but you can't, then you may have this uh, returned anger against yourself, or depression, frustration. And also you may feel, depending on the circumstances, you may have self animosity also. So I wanted to go kind of deeply into Chiron in Aries. Astronomically, Chiron, and I have explained this before in my blog in a written form, but I wanted to review so you can get the whole picture of it. So Chiron is an asteroid, and sometimes it is considered a comet also. And its orbit is between the orbit of Saturn and Uranus. So symbolically and archetypically, um, Saturn is the physical, the tangible, the reality that we are in this earth, right? Our body, physical body, and the 3D reality that we live in. And Uranus is the electrical current that gives life to the spirit, which is represented by Neptune, and it comes from the soul, which is represented by Pluto, and the soul or is also the source, or the if you may call God, you may call it source or the universe or the divinity, however you believe it is, but that's the main source of everything that exists, including life, of course. So it comes from that realm and through the spiritual realm, or the spiritual realm of the ideas, or um, the spirits, right? And then Uranus is the electrical current that gives the life. And Chiron is this, Melanie Reinhardt was one of the astrologers, the first astrologers that study Chiron, and she described it as the rainbow bridge. Rainbow bridge between Uranus and Saturn. And what does this mean is that it is this the way of transitioning from the spirit into the body, right? Being incarnated. And this incarnation is what is represented by Chiron in Aries, right? Uh, if we consider also the mythology of Chiron, Chiron has been was kind of a monster because he was half horse, half human, and it was because of its appearance was rejected by his mother, abandoned by his father. So this is the primal trauma that human beings have when we are born in this level of existence, right? We feel abandoned. We feel that we are here in a world that is aggressive for us, and is not welcoming. We need to toil, we need to work for our food, we need to do things in order to survive. And also there's this longing, right? This longing because we feel that in general, many people feel that we are not from this world. We are spiritual beings having this physical experience because this is the only way we are able to be aware of ourselves through the senses, to seeing, touching, hearing, feeling, right? All the senses allows through the body to make the experience of who we are spiritually. But we have this sensation that we are from somewhere else. We are not uh, we are not here in the right place because we are spiritual beings. So, and this is the experience of Chiron, the vulnerability, the abandonment, the rejection, right? We feel so fragile. We have this fragility and this frustration, this weakness, and the high sensitivity, right? Chiron is very, very high sensitive. So it is this harm that we feel because we are. Uh, I mean, when we come to this world, we are so naked and so vulnerable, and we need. We are the only species that needs so much care in order to survive when we are born, right? And it is the other there is another symbolism in the pain of being born. The blood, the distress of being born is something that makes the baby cry, right? And it is this trauma of being separated from the source, from God or whatever you believe in. So it is traumatic. Being having the event of incarnation is really a traumatic experience. And in Pisces, then we have Pisces and Aries are the places where Chiron stays for a longer period, right? And we don't know how long we are in the spiritual world waiting to be incarnated, but definitely it's a time of not knowing that we are until we are born, and then through these senses we experience our being. So once we are born in Aries, it's time to do things, right? That's Mars, action, to have um, this impulse of life, motivation, and assertiveness. But what happens is that Chiron naturally it's already fragile, as I explained, and is weak, and it feels the harm and the wound is wounded. So Chiron in Aries then is an experience of life, the first breath of life, also the first impulse of life, physical life, and it requires then to work for survival. So the feelings of Chiron in Aries is that we are not good enough, right? Because we have this unconscious memory of our perfection, spiritually perfection, spiritual perfection. So physically, you feel that you can get sick, that you are not worth enough, that you are not perfect enough, that you don't deserve, or that you are not worth, that you may also deny yourself of who you are. And also it's a trauma or a conflict or a complex of identity. It's also associated with the implications of the sexual drive, and so it is associated with gender identity and sexual orientation, and the feminine or masculine. It doesn't matter which sex, but is the primal drive of this energy that is the energy of life, right? With which we work throughout life in order to survive, and in order to make the species survive. So it's this sense of I'm not um, proficient enough or competent enough, right? So Chiron shows this sense of vulnerability that we need in order to the energy that we need in order to survive. So it can show as too much energy or very little energy because we feel inadequate. Then we do an extra effort sometimes, and we become too much. We have too much courage, and we may become reckless, or we. On the other side of the spectrum, we may become discouraged, or we may feel this woundedness in the ego and this sense of identity that we are different. That Chiron was, as I said, half animal, half human. How much different than that can you find? It's this feeling of I'm not fit. I'm not perfect. I have so many vulnerabilities and inadequacies. So and some people may compensate feeling invincible and having this reckless behavior in order to compensate. But so the main goal is accepting the vulnerability, accepting that we are imperfect, that we are who we are. And so let me talk a little bit more about the history, because Chiron, Chiron's orbit is 50 years. So 50 years ago, and then I'm going to start 100 years ago in the 20s. So in the 20s, it was the first rebellion of women, right? It was the time when women were fighting for voting, political vote, and they finally, at least in the Western world, it was the time when they conquered the vote. They became able to or allowed to vote, even though with certain restrictions. Um, but they, for example, at that time, and up until that time, they wore the hair long, and they started cutting their hair, which is very Martian, right? Like the athletes and soldiers that have the short hair. So they started cutting their hair and shortening their skirts, which was a horror. Wow! It was wow. So, and also they started to challenge the sexual norms of the time, or the standards of the traditional standards for women, what women were supposed to do. Well, they started going out alone without a chaperone, and they started smoking and things that were before unheard of. A woman don't do that. And so in the 70s, there was the second wave. I call the 60s, late 60s generation the Woodstock generation, because what happened was the sexual liberation, and it was kind of the second stage of the movement, because at that time there was more in public. The sexuality was more in your face, and it was something that it was challenged, especially the traditional roles, right? And not only for women but for men. Men started not being respected as before, right, as the patriarch of the household, etc. So there was this gender identity conflict in the establishment. Now we are 50 years later, and we have again this resurgency of the gender identity issues and the also the sexual orientation, meaning that humans are experimenting with different approaches to the sexual energy, and especially challenging the traditions. And this is what we have here by Mars in Capricorn and Chiron in Aries. Mars in Capricorn, as I said, it is actions taken by the traditional areas or institutions of society, like the what is established, what is accepted as conventional and okay in society, and this is the challenge that our identity, it could be gender identity or any kind of identity, because it could also be cultural, religious, um, philosophical, ideological, whatever identity we adopt, it is challenged by what was established in the past, what is established as traditional. So we can expect in the next 6 years that Chiron has left in Aries, every time that Mars goes around, it's going to be a higher stage in this process of challenging identity issues of any kind, but especially sexual and gender. So that's another issue that may come up today, either around in society or in your personal life. You may have issues related to your identity. Let me check again my notes. Um, so there is this fight for liberation and for being recognized as an identity of any kind, right? There is the Me Too movement, and we are now aware of sexual behaviors that are not acceptable. For example, pedophilia and abuse of. And it's not only girls and women; it's also boys and men. And there is also the issue of pornography aberrations. Um, what else? So there is this movement of unconventional ideas and behaviors related to sexuality. So what this arises as Chiron moves through Aries is feelings of brokenness, of unworthiness, of being incapable. Sometimes it also may hinder the sexual potency of men and women. So it also relates to weakness in energetic weakness, adding also the energies of Pisces, which also debilitates, right? Neptune in Pisces also reduces the energy, and the vulnerability increases the vulnerability. So and also feelings of lack of motivation, lack of energy to fight, like this defeat that we may feel. As I said, Pisces, Neptune in Pisces contributes to this. And it also arises issues of the wounded body and the wounded head specifically. As I said, it could be head accidents or injuries, and also mental health. Um, and traumas, violence, like war, gun violence, and uh, rape, wars. Uh, so we have the wounded feminine, the wounded masculine, the wounded warrior, and if you're an athlete, also be careful because you may experience injuries or accidents or lack of energy, feeling weak, and that you don't have enough stamina and vitality in order to perform your practice. So also, Chiron in Aries, challenged by Mars, is the challenge of doing something about it, right? You are challenged to react and to do something in order to address those issues. So if you repress those feelings, um, you may explode at some time, or you may overreact. But it could also a repression of the impulses may also give, as I said, autoimmune response, right? The body starts attacking itself. That's one of the unconscious reactions the body takes. You can have depression, frustration, and self animosity. I already explained that. So, um, what is the best way to face this challenge? I think is developing self awareness and not fall in the comparison with others. For example, I think each one of us should focus on who we are as we are and accept our vulnerability, our imperfections, our um, weaknesses, and recognize them and accept them, and not abandon ourselves, because as I said, we already have this abandonment and issue from just incarnating in this life, and we don't need to add our own abandonment, like giving in or renouncing defending ourselves, our identity. So, whatever your issue is, my idea about it is to confront it in a healthy way, um, uh, studying ourselves very deeply and becoming more mindful of our personal needs, and try to satisfy our personal needs of identity in the best way possible. I think also about people who are displaced by war and violence, that many of them don't even have the choice to find a solution because they are blocked. As I said, Mars square Chiron blocks us sometimes from all the fronts, and it's very hard for us to uh, take an action or do something. But if you're not in an extreme position like that, because every person is different, right? Every chart is different, and you may have Chiron in the third house. About the problem could be related to communication, the way you communicate, or the way you think, or the way you learn. Other person may have Chiron in the 11th house, the way they relate socially to groups or friends, or about their goals. So for every person, the challenge is different. So try the best you can to incorporate meditation in order to become aware of your personal needs for identity, and also acceptance. And let's say, well, I am who I am, and this is the identity that I choose to be, and this is how I am going to live. And there will be people who won't like it, and there will be people who will support you, but that's the way with life in general. So um, I hope I give you enough tools and ideas in order to work with this challenging aspect, this the last quarter square. And as I said, it is a time of assimilation of the cycle, what has happened since Mars conjuncted Chiron. Um, I think Chiron was discovered in April 77, and it was in Taurus. But the first time that Chiron ingressed in Aries, it was April 17, 2018. And at that time, the moon and Venus were square the nodal axis. That's another information that reflects the challenge of being a woman, and the challenge of the feminine, the feminine, and especially the mother, because the moon with Venus is feminine and mothers, in the way that it's a turning point between the past and the future. And we hear issues of the role or the identity of women in society, and the role of mothers. There are also issues about abortion and pregnancy, and all kinds of feminine issues that are on the table because of this Chiron transiting Aries. So, but as I said, not only the feminine, the masculine also has his hero's journey. So I hope this can help. And if you have questions or comments or things that you would like to know more, just don't hesitate to make a comment in the below the video. I'll put the link to my blog in the description box. There you find plenty of articles about Chiron, and especially the thing that I recommend to read is The Myth of Chiron, which shows you the archetypes and the symbolism of Chiron. So I wish you the best. I hope you don't get head injuries, and that you stay healthy and with full of energy and courage. So thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much.